If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to the channel. Sharing it with your friends and family helps spread knowledge, and when we help others grow, we grow too. Thank you so much for listening. Let's dive into the podcast. Chapter 1, The Two Lands Before Unification. Part 1, Predynastic Societies and Cultures. The fertile banks of the Nile River hummed with life thousands of years before any pharaoh would claim dominion over Egypt. Scattered communities dotted the valley, each developing their own ways of surviving and thriving in this green ribbon cutting through endless desert. These early peoples discovered something remarkable about their river. Unlike other waterways that flooded randomly and destructively, the Nile rose and fell in predictable patterns. Smart farmers learned to work with these cycles, planting crops just as the waters receded and left behind rich, dark soil. They dug simple channels to guide water where they needed it most, turning barren patches into productive fields. Village potters developed distinct styles that told stories about their communities. Northern settlements crafted smooth, elegant vessels with geometric patterns. Southern villages preferred rougher textures and painted their pottery with images of animals and plants. These ceramic creations served practical purposes, storing grain and water, but they also revealed something deeper about how different groups saw their world. Tool-making became an art form as communities competed to create better implements. Some villages specialized in sharp flint blades that could slice through thick reeds. Others mastered the creation of grinding stones that turned wild grains into flour. Copper working emerged in certain areas, producing the first metal tools that outperformed anything made from stone. Death held special meaning for these river dwellers. Simple pit graves evolved into elaborate burial chambers lined with mud bricks. The wealthy received collections of pottery, jewelry, and food to sustain them in whatever came next. These funeral customs varied dramatically between regions, suggesting that ideas about the afterlife differed as much as pottery styles. Trade networks connected distant villages in surprising ways. Shells from the Red Sea appeared in graves far up the Nile. Obsidian from distant volcanic regions turned up in northern settlements. Gold from southern mines made its way to craftsmen hundreds of miles away. These exchange routes created bonds between communities that might otherwise have remained isolated. Religious practices began taking recognizable forms. People carved images of animals onto rocks and crafted small figurines representing mysterious forces. Bulls symbolized strength and fertility. Birds represented the connection between earth and sky. Crocodiles embodied the dangerous power of the river itself. Competition between villages intensified as populations grew. Successful communities attracted followers from less prosperous areas. Leaders emerged who could organize large construction projects and coordinate trade expeditions. Some settlements began dominating their neighbors through superior organization rather than simple force. Archaeological evidence suggests that two major cultural regions were crystallizing by this period. The North developed different architectural styles, burial practices, and artistic traditions than the South. This division would prove crucial as ambitious leaders began dreaming of broader control over the river valley's riches. Part 2, Upper and Lower Egypt's Political Identities. The rich cultural foundations laid by pre-dynastic societies created fertile ground for two distinct political identities to emerge along the Nile. The river's geography naturally divided Egypt into two regions, each developing its own character, ambitions, and way of governing. In the south, Upper Egypt stretched from the First Cataract near modern Aswan down to Memphis. This narrow valley, squeezed between desert cliffs, fostered a culture of fierce independence and warrior traditions. The southern rulers wore the distinctive white crown, tall and bowling pin-shaped, symbolizing their dominion over the river's source. Their capital at Hierakonpolis became a center of power where chieftains gathered to plan raids and forge alliances. The falcon god Horus soared above their banners, representing the sky's dominance over the confined valley below. The harsh geography of Upper Egypt bred tough, disciplined people. Limited farmland meant constant competition for resources. Chiefs who could organize successful raids on neighboring territories attracted loyal followers. Military prowess determined leadership more than birthright. The southern elite developed sophisticated weapons and battle tactics, viewing warfare as both necessity and honor. Meanwhile, Lower Egypt spread across the broad delta, where the Nile fanned into multiple channels before reaching the Mediterranean. This marshy wonderland of abundant fish, fowl, and fertile soil supported larger populations with less conflict. The northern rulers adopted the red crown, squat and distinctive, symbolizing their control over the river's mouth. Their power center at Budo reflected a more collaborative approach to governance, with councils of elders sharing authority. Geography shaped entirely different worldviews. Delta inhabitants developed complex irrigation systems requiring cooperation between communities. Trade with Mediterranean peoples brought new ideas and technologies. The cobra goddess Wadjet protected the north, representing the earth's fertility rather than sky's power. Northern leaders succeeded through diplomacy and economic management rather than conquest. These contrasting environments produced fundamentally different political philosophies. Upper Egypt valued centralized authority under strong warrior kings who commanded through personal charisma and military success. Lower Egypt preferred distributed power among merchant chiefs who governed through consensus and shared prosperity. Competition between the regions intensified as populations grew and resources became more precious. Each territory possessed what the other needed. The south controlled gold mines and stone quarries essential for monumental construction. The north commanded trade routes and agricultural surpluses that could feed armies. Both regions eyed the other's assets with growing desire. Religious differences deepened political divisions. Southern priests emphasized solar deities and afterlife journeys, requiring elaborate burial preparations. Northern spiritual leaders focused on earth goddesses and agricultural cycles tied to practical farming needs. These competing belief systems reinforced each region's distinct identity and justified their separate existence. Yet the same river that divided them also connected them. Ambitious leaders in both regions began imagining control over the entire valley. The stage was set for conflict, but also for someone bold enough to dream of uniting these two proud, distinct civilizations under one crown. Part 3. Early Religious Symbolism and Art. In this divided world of two separate kingdoms, the gods themselves began to take sides. Sacred symbols emerged from temple walls and royal tombs, each carrying profound meaning that would echo through centuries of Egyptian history. Artists and priests worked together to create visual languages that spoke directly to the hearts of their people. The Southern Kingdom developed a deep fascination with falcon imagery. The powerful bird soaring high above the Nile represented their growing ambitions and connection to the sky god Horus. Carved into stone palettes and painted on pottery, these falcons appeared with outstretched wings, as if claiming dominion over all they surveyed. The priests taught that their rulers were living embodiments of this divine bird, blessed with supernatural sight and strength. Meanwhile, in the northern delta, cobra symbols slithered across ceremonial objects and royal headpieces. The serpent goddess Wadjet became their protective deity. Her hood flared in warning against any who might threaten their fertile lands. Delta artisans crafted intricate jewelry featuring coiled cobras, their bodies forming protective circles around precious stones. These weren't mere decorations, but powerful statements of religious and political identity. Sacred animals began appearing everywhere in both regions. Bulls represented raw power and fertility in the south, their massive forms carved into cliff faces and molded into ceremonial vessels. Hippos dominated northern religious art, their association with the life-giving floods making them symbols of abundance and renewal. Even crocodiles earned reverence as guardians of the river's mysteries. The first attempts at written communication emerged from these religious needs. Simple pictures evolved into more complex symbols as priests sought ways to record sacred names and divine commands. A bird might represent not just any bird, but the specific deity it served. A circle with rays could mean the sun or the god who controlled it. These early picture writings appeared on tomb walls and ceremonial objects, creating the foundation for what would become hieroglyphic writing. Burial practices revealed the deepest spiritual beliefs of each region. Southern tombs grew increasingly elaborate, filled with goods needed for the afterlife journey through solar realms. Northern graves focused more on practical items for continued existence in earthly paradise. The art adorning these resting places showed clear regional preferences in both style and content. Ceremonial palettes became canvases for political and religious messages. Rulers commissioned artists to carve scenes of triumph and divine blessing, creating portable propaganda pieces that traveled between communities. These objects carried more than artistic beauty. They transmitted the visual vocabulary of power and belief that was spreading throughout the valley. As these distinct artistic traditions developed, something remarkable began happening. Symbols from one region started appearing in the other's artwork. A southern falcon might share space with a northern cobra on the same ceremonial object. Artists began experimenting with combining imagery, perhaps sensing that their separate worlds were drawing closer together. The stage was set for a dramatic convergence of these powerful visual languages. Part 4. Prelude to Dynasty, Narmer's Ascension. The mixing of symbols across the two lands told a deeper story than mere artistic exchange. Behind these visual experiments lay a growing network of relationships between powerful families, traders, and warrior chiefs who saw opportunity in cooperation rather than endless conflict. Small kingdoms along the Nile had spent generations raiding and trading with each other. But by 3100 BCE, a new pattern emerged. Instead of brief alliances followed by betrayal, some leaders began building lasting partnerships that crossed regional boundaries. In Upper Egypt, a warrior named Narmer controlled several important settlements around Hieroglyphs. Unlike previous local chiefs who focused on defending their immediate territory, Narmer understood that real power came from connecting different communities under shared leadership. He wasn't the first to attempt this, but he possessed something his predecessors lacked: the ability to make former enemies see him as a legitimate ruler rather than just another conqueror. Archaeological evidence suggests Narmer's rise wasn't sudden or accidental. Ceremonial objects bearing his name appear in locations hundreds of miles apart, indicating he commanded respect across vast distances. More telling, these artifacts show him performing religious rituals traditionally associated with both Upper and Lower Egyptian traditions. He wasn't simply imposing southern customs on northern territories. He was creating new ceremonies that honored both regions' sacred practices. The famous Narmer palette, discovered at Hieroglyphs, captures this transformation in stone. On one side, Narmer appears wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt, wielding a mace over a kneeling captive. On the reverse, he wears Lower Egypt's red crown while inspecting rows of decapitated enemies. But the palette shows more than military conquest. It depicts Narmer as a divine ruler blessed by the gods of both lands, someone who could legitimately claim authority over the entire Nile Valley. What made Narmer different was his understanding that lasting power required more than battlefield victories. He established new administrative centers, appointed governors from local noble families, and standardized religious practices that previously varied between communities. Most importantly, he began the process of creating a unified Egyptian identity that transcended old regional loyalties. The transformation wasn't immediate or complete. Many local traditions persisted, and some communities maintained semi-independent status for generations. But Narmer had established something unprecedented, a framework for ruling the entire Nile Valley as a single political entity. He created institutions and symbols that future pharaohs would inherit and expand, setting the foundation for 3 millennia of Egyptian civilization. His innovations in ceremony, administration, and religious authority would soon face their greatest test as his successors worked to transform his personal achievements into a lasting dynasty. Chapter 2: The Unification and the First Pharaohs. Part 1: Narmer and Menes, Myth and Fact. Around 3100 BCE, the dusty regions of Upper and Lower Egypt witnessed something extraordinary. 2 names echo through time from this pivotal moment: Narmer and Menes. These figures stand at the crossroads between legend and historical fact. Their stories woven so tightly together that scholars still debate whether they were the same person or separate rulers whose achievements merged in memory. The historical record presents challenges. Ancient Egyptian sources, written centuries after these events, blend factual accounts with mythical elements. King lists from later periods mention both names, sometimes separately, sometimes as one. This mixing of myth and reality reflects how Egyptians understood their past. They saw their first pharaoh not just as a military conqueror, but as a divine figure chosen by the gods to unite their land. Narmer emerges most clearly in archaeological evidence. His name appears on ancient artifacts, particularly the famous palette discovered at Hieroglyphs. This ceremonial object shows him wearing the crowns of both Upper and Lower Egypt, suggesting he ruled over the unified kingdom. The imagery depicts him striking down enemies and reviewing captured foes. These weren't just artistic choices. They were carefully crafted messages about power, legitimacy, and divine approval. Menes, meanwhile, appears prominently in written sources from later periods. Ancient historians like Manetho credited him with founding the first dynasty and establishing Memphis as the new capital. The stories describe how he redirected the Nile River to create suitable ground for his new city. Whether this engineering feat actually happened or represents symbolic storytelling about taming the forces of nature remains uncertain. The regalia associated with these rulers tells its own story. The double crown, combining the white crown of Upper Egypt with the red crown of Lower Egypt, became the ultimate symbol of unified rule. This wasn't mere fashion. The crown physically represented the merger of 2 distinct regions with different traditions, gods, and ways of life. When a pharaoh wore it, he claimed authority over both lands and their peoples. Divine sanction played a crucial role in legitimizing this new form of kingship. Both Narmer and Menes were portrayed as chosen by the gods, particularly Horus, the falcon deity associated with royal power. This divine connection elevated them above mere military commanders or regional chiefs. They became living gods on earth, responsible for maintaining cosmic order throughout their realm. The conquest narratives surrounding these figures established patterns that would define Egyptian kingship for millennia. Victory over enemies, protection of the people, and maintenance of divine order became the essential duties of every pharaoh. These weren't just political necessities, but sacred obligations. These legendary beginnings created the foundation story for Egypt's first dynasty. Whether one person or 2, whether entirely factual or partly mythical, Narmer and Menes represent the moment when Egypt transformed from a collection of competing regions into a unified kingdom under divine rule. Part 2: The Narmer Palette, Iconography of Power. In the dusty halls of ancient Egyptian temples, artisans carved more than simple pictures into stone. They created weapons of persuasion that would speak louder than any army. The most powerful of these silent messengers was a ceremonial palette discovered thousands of years later, bearing the image of King Narmer in his moment of triumph. This wasn't just art for beauty's sake. Every line, every symbol, every figure served a calculated purpose. The palette told a story, that needed no words, speaking directly to anyone who saw it about who held power and why they deserved it. On one side, Narmer appears as a towering giant, his enemies literally beneath his feet. He raises a war club high above a kneeling captive, frozen forever in the moment before the killing blow. The size difference wasn't accidental. Egyptian artists deliberately made kings appear larger than life, dwarfing their enemies and subjects alike. This visual trick sent a clear message. The pharaoh was not just another man, but something far greater. Above Narmer's head, the falcon god Horus spreads protective wings, showing divine approval for the king's actions. The gods themselves supported this conquest. On the palette's reverse side, Narmer walks in procession, wearing the crown of unified Egypt. Before him lie rows of headless enemies, their bodies arranged in neat lines like a grim harvest. Two fantastic creatures with serpentine necks intertwine in the center, their heads held by leashes in human hands. Even mythical beasts bowed to Pharaoh's will. Every detail reinforced the same themes. Victory belonged to Narmer. The gods blessed his rule. His enemies fell before him like grain before the scythe. Opposition was not just defeated, but utterly destroyed. The palette showed no mercy, no negotiation, no compromise, only complete submission to the new order. This stone slab became a template for royal propaganda that would endure for 3,000 years. Future pharaohs would commission similar works, always showing themselves as divine giants, crushing their foes. The artistic language developed here became Egypt's visual vocabulary of power. The palette's genius lay in its accessibility. Illiterate farmers could read its message as clearly as learned scribes. Pictures transcended language barriers, speaking to Egyptians from different regions who might not share dialects, but could understand these universal symbols of dominance and divine favor. From this carved stone emerged a new way of thinking about kingship. The pharaoh wasn't just a successful warlord who had won recent battles. He was the earthly representative of cosmic order itself, chosen by the gods to maintain balance in the world. This palette transformed Narmer from a mortal king into something approaching a living deity, setting the stage for the absolute monarchy that would define Egypt for millennia. Part 3. Memphis, the new capital. With absolute monarchy now established in concept, Narmer faced a practical challenge. Where should this divine king rule from? The answer would reshape Egypt's future and create one of history's most strategically brilliant capital cities. Memphis rose at the exact point where the Nile Delta began to fan out into multiple branches. This wasn't accidental geography. Narmer's advisors understood that controlling this junction meant controlling Egypt's economic lifeline. Every boat carrying grain from the fertile delta to the south had to pass Memphis. Every caravan bringing gold and ivory from Nubia to the north couldn't avoid this bottleneck. The location offered something even more valuable than trade control. Memphis sat at the natural border between Upper and Lower Egypt, the two lands Narmer had just conquered. Building his capital here sent a clear message to both regions. The pharaoh didn't favor north over south or south over north. He stood between them, equally distant from both, ruling as the bridge that connected formerly separate worlds. Workers began constructing the city with unprecedented planning. Unlike older settlements that grew organically around temples or markets, Memphis followed a deliberate design. Wide ceremonial avenues led to massive royal complexes. Administrative buildings clustered near the harbor, where scribes could efficiently track the wealth flowing through Egypt's new economic center. The palace complex itself became a symbol of the pharaoh's dual nature. Courtyards bore symbols from both Upper and Lower Egypt, architectural styles that blended traditions from different regions. When visiting nobles entered these halls, they saw their own cultural heritage reflected alongside their former enemies' traditions. Now united under one crown, Memphis attracted people from across the newly unified kingdom. Craftsmen who had once served local chiefs now worked directly for the pharaoh. Merchants found new opportunities in a city that connected previously separate trading networks. Priests from different temples established branches in the capital, creating a religious melting pot that gradually standardized Egyptian spiritual practices. The bureaucracy that emerged from Memphis represented something entirely new in human civilization. Previous rulers had governed through personal relationships and temporary alliances. The pharaoh's officials, however, answered to permanent positions with clearly defined responsibilities. Tax collectors reported to provincial governors, who answered to royal administrators, who served the pharaoh directly. This chain of command allowed unprecedented control over Egypt's resources. When floods damaged crops in one region, Memphis could redirect grain from surplus areas. When foreign threats emerged, the capital could mobilize soldiers from across the kingdom within weeks rather than months. The success of Memphis proved that unification wasn't just about military conquest. It required creating institutions that could manage diversity while maintaining unity. From this carefully planned city, the pharaoh's authority extended along the entire Nile, backed by the administrative machinery that would soon transform Egypt into the ancient world's most efficiently governed state. Part 4. Creation of Royal Bureaucracy. The machinery of government that emerged from Memphis represented a revolution in human organization. For the first time in history, a single ruler commanded an administrative system that could manage resources across hundreds of miles of territory with remarkable precision. The pharaoh stood at the apex of this new hierarchy, but he couldn't rule Egypt alone. Below him, a carefully structured pyramid of officials carried out his will throughout the kingdom. The vizier served as the pharaoh's right hand, overseeing all government departments and reporting directly to the throne. This position required extraordinary competence, as the vizier coordinated everything from tax collection to military campaigns. Regional governors, called nomarchs, controlled Egypt's administrative districts. These men bridged the gap between Memphis and local communities, ensuring that royal commands reached every village along the Nile. They collected taxes, maintained order, and mobilized workers for royal projects. Their loyalty to the pharaoh determined whether the kingdom thrived or fractured. The real innovation lay in record-keeping. Egyptian scribes developed the world's first comprehensive filing system, tracking everything from grain harvests to cattle counts. Clay tablets and papyrus scrolls documented tax payments, legal disputes, and population changes. This information flowed upward through the bureaucracy, giving Memphis unprecedented knowledge about the kingdom's condition. Tax collection became an exact science. Officials recorded the annual flood levels, calculated expected crop yields, and determined fair tax rates for each district. When farmers brought grain to royal storehouses, scribes weighed and documented every bushel. This system generated enormous wealth that funded the pharaoh's building projects, military expeditions, and administrative expenses. Resource management reached new levels of sophistication. The government maintained detailed inventories of stored grain, precious metals, and manufactured goods. When drought struck one region, administrators could quickly redistribute supplies from areas with surplus. This prevented famines that had previously devastated Egyptian communities. The bureaucracy also standardized weights, measures, and currency throughout the kingdom. A merchant traveling from southern Egypt to the Delta could conduct business using the same standards everywhere. This uniformity facilitated trade and strengthened economic ties between distant regions. Most importantly, this administrative revolution concentrated power in Memphis like never before. Every major decision required approval from the capital. Local disputes were settled according to royal law rather than tribal customs. The pharaoh's authority penetrated every aspect of Egyptian life through his network of officials. The success of this system transformed Egypt from a collection of competing communities into a unified state capable of monumental achievements. The same bureaucracy that collected taxes would soon organize the construction of pyramids, manage vast irrigation projects, and coordinate military campaigns that expanded Egyptian influence far beyond the Nile Valley. The foundation was laid for 3 millennia of pharaonic rule. Chapter 3: Foundations of Egyptian Civilization. Part 1: Social Hierarchy and Divine Kingship. When the dust settled from the Great Unification, a new world emerged along the Nile. The Pharaoh stood at the very top, but he was more than just a king. People believed he was a living god walking among them. This belief changed everything about how Egyptian society worked. The Pharaoh's divine nature meant his word was law. When he spoke, it carried the weight of heaven itself. This wasn't just political power, it was religious truth that shaped every aspect of daily life. People saw him as the bridge between the mortal world and the realm of the gods. Directly below the pharaoh stood the priests. They served the gods in massive temples and interpreted divine will for the people. These men held enormous influence because they controlled the sacred rituals that kept Egypt running smoothly. The priests also managed vast temple lands and stored grain for lean years, making them both spiritual and economic powers. Government officials formed the next level. These scribes, tax collectors, and administrators kept the kingdom functioning. They recorded harvests, collected taxes, and carried out the pharaoh's commands across the vast territory. Many came from wealthy families, but some rose through talent and education. Their ability to read and write hieroglyphs made them incredibly valuable. Skilled artisans occupied a respected middle position. Stone carvers, metalworkers, painters, and jewelry makers created the beautiful objects that filled palaces and tombs. Their work required years of training and artistic vision. The pharaoh and nobles competed for the best craftsmen, ensuring these workers lived comfortably. At the bottom lived the farmers who made up most of Egypt's population. They worked the fertile fields during flood season and helped build monuments during the dry months. Though they owned little, the system protected them. The pharaoh's divine duty included ensuring their survival during bad harvests. This hierarchy wasn't just about wealth or power. It reflected cosmic order itself. Egyptians believed the gods had designed this system to maintain balance in the world. Challenging it meant challenging the divine plan. When everyone stayed in their proper place and fulfilled their duties, the Nile would flood, crops would grow, and Egypt would prosper. The pharaoh's divine status influenced every law and custom. Marriage rules, business practices, and even farming methods all reflected his sacred authority. Religious festivals celebrating the pharaoh reinforced these beliefs throughout the year. Children learned their place in society by watching these ceremonies and understanding how the god-king watched over them. This rigid but stable system created the foundation for Egypt's remarkable longevity. For over 3,000 years, this social structure would endure with remarkable consistency, adapting to challenges while maintaining its essential character. Part 2: Innovations in Writing and Administration. With the pharaoh established as a divine ruler and social order firmly in place, the early Egyptian state faced a crucial challenge: how to manage and communicate across hundreds of miles of territory along the Nile. The solution would transform not just Egypt, but human civilization itself. Around 3200 BCE, Egyptian scribes began developing a revolutionary system of writing. Unlike simple picture symbols used elsewhere, hieroglyphics combined images with sounds and ideas. A bird might represent the actual creature, the sound it made, or an abstract concept like flight. This flexibility allowed scribes to record everything from tax receipts to religious prayers with remarkable precision. The first hieroglyphic inscriptions appeared on royal monuments and tomb walls, proclaiming the pharaoh's divine achievements. But administrators quickly realized writing's practical power. Tax collectors could now record exact amounts of grain from each village. Military commanders could send detailed orders across vast distances. Priests could preserve sacred rituals word for word, ensuring religious ceremonies remained consistent throughout the kingdom. Scribes became essential figures in Egyptian society, ranking just below priests and nobles. They trained for years in special schools, memorizing hundreds of symbols and practicing on broken pottery before graduating to precious papyrus. These educated men formed the backbone of Egyptian administration, creating the world's first true bureaucracy. The writing system enabled unprecedented record-keeping. Scribes documented everything: harvest yields, construction projects, legal disputes, and diplomatic correspondence. They tracked the annual Nile flood patterns, helping predict agricultural cycles. They recorded laws and royal decrees, ensuring consistent justice across the kingdom. This systematic approach to information created institutional memory that outlasted individual rulers. Communication networks flourished as written messages replaced unreliable oral transmission. Royal commands could reach distant provinces within weeks rather than months. Provincial governors sent detailed reports back to the capital, keeping the pharaoh informed of local conditions. Trade agreements with neighboring regions became more complex and reliable when written down. Religious life transformed as priests codified sacred texts. Creation myths, ritual procedures, and hymns to the gods were preserved exactly, preventing regional variations that might weaken religious unity. The famous pyramid texts, carved inside royal tombs, represent humanity's oldest recorded religious literature. Administrative innovations accompanied writing development. Scribes created standardized measures for grain, cloth, and precious metals. They established consistent calendar systems based on star observations and flood cycles. They developed mathematical concepts for construction projects and land surveying that would influence architecture for millennia. This administrative revolution strengthened pharaonic power immeasurably. Written laws replaced local customs, creating unified legal standards. Tax collection became systematic rather than arbitrary. Construction projects could be planned and coordinated with unprecedented scale and precision. The effects rippled through Egyptian society. Merchants could maintain detailed business records. Craftsmen could pass down technical knowledge through written manuals. Families could preserve their histories and legal claims across generations. As writing and administration matured, Egypt's rulers gained confidence to undertake ambitious projects that would demonstrate their divine authority in stone and mortar, setting the stage for architectural marvels that would define Egyptian civilization. Part 3. Early Monumental Architecture. The newly unified Egypt possessed something its neighbors lacked: the administrative power to turn grand visions into reality. Pharaohs who ruled as living gods needed monuments that proved their divine connection. The answer lay in stone. Early Egyptian builders began with mastabas, rectangular structures made from mud brick and stone. These flat-topped tombs housed the bodies of nobles and royal family members. Workers dug deep shafts into the ground, creating burial chambers below. Above ground, the mastaba provided space for offerings and rituals. The design was practical yet symbolic. The solid mass represented permanence, while the underground chambers connected the deceased to the earth itself. Construction required careful planning and massive labor forces. Quarries along the Nile provided limestone and granite. Workers used copper tools, wooden levers, and rope to cut and move stones weighing several tons. Teams of men pulled blocks on wooden rollers across the desert. The logistics demanded the same administrative skills that managed tax collection and grain storage. Scribes recorded every detail, from worker rations to stone deliveries. The religious meaning ran deeper than mere burial. Egyptians believed death was a transition, not an ending. The soul needed a preserved body and proper rituals to reach the afterlife. Mastabas provided both. Priests performed daily ceremonies, bringing food and incense to nourish the departed spirit. The tomb's orientation aligned with cardinal directions, connecting the dead to cosmic forces. Wall paintings showed scenes of daily life, ensuring the deceased could continue familiar activities in eternity. Social organization shaped every aspect of construction. Pharaohs commanded the largest and most elaborate tombs. Their mastabas required thousands of workers, including skilled stonecutters, artists, and architects. Lesser nobles received smaller versions, while common people made do with simple graves. This hierarchy in death reflected the living world's structure. King Djoser's architect, Imhotep, revolutionized tomb building around 2630 BCE. Instead of one mastaba, he stacked 6 on top of each other, creating the step pyramid at Saqqara. This innovation required advanced engineering knowledge. Workers had to calculate weight distribution and structural stability. The result stood nearly 200 feet tall, visible for miles across the Nile Valley. The step pyramid represented more than architectural achievement. Its height brought the pharaoh closer to the sun god Ra and the heavens. The stepped design created a stairway the king's spirit could climb to join the gods. Underground passages and chambers grew more complex, featuring beautiful reliefs and storage rooms filled with grave goods. These early monuments established patterns that would define Egyptian architecture for millennia. They demonstrated the pharaoh's power to mobilize resources and command nature itself. Stone structures promised eternity in ways mud brick never could. As construction techniques improved and religious beliefs deepened, Egyptian rulers would push these concepts even further, creating increasingly ambitious projects that would reshape both landscape and society. Part 4. Building the Ideology of Eternal Egypt. The massive stone monuments rising from the desert sands served as more than impressive displays of power. They became the foundation for ideas that would define Egyptian civilization for over 3,000 years. As pharaohs commissioned increasingly ambitious projects, they created a system of beliefs that promised their people something extraordinary: eternal life and cosmic balance. The concept of Maat emerged as the heart of Egyptian thinking. This principle represented truth, justice, and the natural order of the universe. Egyptians believed the pharaoh maintained Maat on earth, keeping chaos at bay through proper rule and religious observance. When the Nile flooded at the right time and crops grew abundantly, people saw proof that their king successfully balanced the cosmic forces. This belief gave pharaohs tremendous authority while creating expectations they had to meet. Temple complexes became centers where these ideas took physical form. Priests performed daily rituals to sustain Maat, offering food and prayers to the gods. The temples themselves told stories through their design. Massive stone walls featured hieroglyphic texts describing the pharaoh's divine connection and eternal duties. Tall columns represented the primordial marsh where creation began. Sacred lakes within temple grounds symbolized the waters of chaos that existed before the world formed. The afterlife promised ordinary Egyptians their own form of eternity. While pharaohs built pyramids, common people prepared simpler tombs filled with everyday objects they would need in the next world. Craftsmen created beautiful coffins, jewelry, and furniture specifically for burial. This practice created entire industries dedicated to death preparation, from embalmers who preserved bodies to artists who painted tomb walls with scenes of eternal feasts and celebrations. Literature reinforced these beliefs through stories and wisdom texts. Scribes copied tales of gods and heroes, spreading consistent messages about proper behavior and cosmic order. The instructions of Ptahhotep taught young officials how to serve faithfully, while creation myths explained how the gods established the world's proper structure. These texts traveled throughout Egypt, ensuring people from different regions shared similar beliefs about their place in the universe. Religious festivals brought communities together to celebrate these ideas. During the Opet festival, priests carried the god Amun's statue from Karnak to Luxor Temple, symbolically renewing the pharaoh's divine authority. Ordinary people lined the processional route, participating in ceremonies that reinforced their connection to the cosmic order. Music, dancing, and feasting created joyful experiences that made abstract concepts feel real and immediate. The Pharaonic succession system promised continuity across generations. Each new ruler became Horus, the living god, while his predecessor joined Osiris in the underworld. This cycle assured Egyptians that divine protection would never end. Even as individual kings died, royal names and titles emphasized this eternal nature, often including references to Ra, Amun, or other major deities. These interwoven beliefs created a remarkably stable civilization that would endure foreign invasions, economic hardships, and political upheavals while maintaining its essential character for millennia. Chapter 4: Legacy and Lasting Impact. Part 1: Dynastic Cycle and Historical Memory. Ancient Egypt lived and breathed through patterns that repeated like the Nile's yearly flood. Kings rose to power, unified the land, built great monuments, then watched their kingdoms splinter into chaos. The cycle always came full circle. New rulers would emerge from the disorder, piece the kingdom back together, and the story would begin again. The first pharaohs understood something profound about power and memory. They knew their actions would echo through time, becoming models for future kings. When Narmer united Upper and Lower Egypt, he created more than a kingdom. He established a blueprint that rulers would follow for 3,000 years. Every pharaoh who came after looked back to those early kings, studying their methods and copying their symbols. Egyptian scribes became master storytellers of their own history. They wrote on papyrus, carved in stone, and painted on temple walls. These records were not just lists of dates and battles. They transformed real events into legends that taught important lessons. A pharaoh's military victory became proof of divine favor. A time of prosperity showed the god's blessing on the kingdom. Even defeats were rewritten as tests that made Egypt stronger. The cycle of unity and division created distinct chapters in Egyptian history. The Old Kingdom saw pyramid builders reach toward heaven. The Middle Kingdom brought literature and art to new heights. The New Kingdom expanded borders and built vast temple complexes. Between these golden ages came intermediate periods of confusion and conflict. Yet each dark time ended with renewal and rebirth. Memory shaped how Egyptians saw themselves as a chosen people. They believed their land was the center of creation, blessed by the gods above all others. Their pharaohs were not mere mortals, but living gods who maintained cosmic balance. This worldview helped Egypt survive conquest after conquest. Greeks, Romans, Arabs, and Turks all ruled the Nile Valley, but something essentially Egyptian endured beneath each new layer of foreign control. The stories Egyptians told about their past became as important as the events themselves. King lists carved in temples emphasized continuity and divine approval. Religious texts promised eternal life to those who followed ancient ways. Art depicted pharaohs in poses identical to their predecessors from centuries before. This careful preservation of tradition created a civilization that seemed to exist outside normal time. Future rulers studied these preserved memories like instruction manuals. They learned that successful pharaohs built monuments, maintained temples, and projected strength. They discovered that the kingdom's health depended on keeping ancient rituals alive. Most importantly, they understood that their own actions would someday become legends for kings not yet born. This awareness of their place in the great cycle gave Egyptian civilization its remarkable stability and enduring power. Part 2: Art, Science, and Daily Life. This awareness of their place in history drove Egyptian rulers to create something extraordinary. They built a civilization where innovation served tradition, where new discoveries strengthened ancient beliefs rather than replacing them. The pharaohs who followed those first kings transformed Egypt into a beacon of human achievement. Egyptian artists developed techniques that would define beauty for thousands of years. They created a visual language so perfect that painters and sculptors barely changed it across 30 dynasties. Every statue captured the eternal nature of kingship. Every wall painting told stories that connected the present moment to the gods themselves. Artists learned to carve granite with precision that modern tools struggle to match. They mixed pigments that stayed brilliant after centuries buried in tombs. Their work wasn't just decoration. It was magic made visible, designed to make the pharaoh's power last forever. Egyptian doctors became the ancient world's most skilled healers. They wrote medical texts that described surgical procedures, bone setting, and treatments for dozens of conditions. Other civilizations sent their sick to Egypt for treatment. Egyptian physicians understood how blood moved through the body. They knew how to remove cataracts from eyes and perform brain surgery. Royal doctors kept detailed records of their successes and failures, creating knowledge that saved countless lives. The same precision appeared in Egyptian mathematics and engineering. Royal architects calculated angles and measurements that let them build pyramids that still stand today. They developed geometry that helped farmers redraw their fields after each flood. Egyptian surveyors created maps so accurate that modern archaeologists use them to find buried cities. They invented a calendar that tracked the Nile's floods with perfect timing. This wasn't just practical knowledge. It was proof that Egyptian minds could understand the hidden patterns that governed the universe. Daily life reflected these advances in countless ways. Common people used Egyptian-invented papyrus for writing. They wore linen so fine that other civilizations paid fortunes for small pieces. Egyptian glassmakers created vessels that seemed to capture sunlight itself. Farmers used irrigation systems that turned desert into garden. Even ordinary Egyptians lived with technologies that made them the envy of the ancient world. This mastery over materials and techniques gave Egypt something precious: the confidence that came from proven superiority. While other people struggled with basic survival, Egyptians created beauty that lasted forever. They built a civilization where art, science, and daily life all reinforced the same message. Egypt had discovered the secrets of permanent greatness. This knowledge would soon transform how pharaohs understood their role in maintaining the cosmic order itself. Part 3. Pharaoh's role in cosmic order. Maat. The pharaoh sat in his palace at dawn, but this was no ordinary royal awakening. As the sun's first rays touched the temple walls, he performed rituals that connected his earthly kingdom to the cosmic forces above. This daily ceremony represented something far more powerful than personal devotion. It was the foundation of Egyptian civilization itself. Maat governed everything in ancient Egypt. This concept meant truth, justice, balance, and cosmic order, all rolled into one divine principle. The pharaoh didn't just rule people and land. He maintained the delicate balance between chaos and order that kept the entire universe functioning properly. When floods came at the right time, when harvests flourished, when enemies stayed away, Egyptians knew their king was fulfilling his cosmic duty. Every decision the pharaoh made had to honor Maat. Court scribes recorded legal judgments that reflected divine justice. Tax collectors followed principles that prevented exploitation while funding public works. Military campaigns were justified as restoring proper order against forces of chaos. Even architectural projects followed cosmic patterns that mirrored the movements of stars and planets. The pharaoh's daily routine reinforced this cosmic connection. Before eating, he offered food to the gods. Before making pronouncements, he consulted priests who interpreted divine will. His clothing, jewelry, and crown all carried symbols that reminded observers of his role as intermediary between heaven and earth. Citizens saw their king as literally maintaining the stability of reality itself. This system created remarkable stability. When people believed their ruler's actions directly affected cosmic balance, they supported policies that might otherwise seem burdensome. High taxes became offerings to maintain divine favor. Military service became participation in cosmic struggle. Even harsh punishments seemed necessary to prevent universal chaos. The concept worked because it addressed real fears. Ancient peoples lived with constant uncertainty about floods, famines, wars, and diseases. Ma'at promised that proper leadership could control these forces. The pharaoh's success in maintaining prosperity and order proved his divine connection. His failures suggested cosmic displeasure that required correction through ritual and reform. Temple ceremonies reinforced this message daily. Priests performed complex rituals that supposedly kept the sun rising, the Nile flooding, and enemies at bay. The pharaoh's participation in these ceremonies demonstrated his commitment to cosmic duty. Citizens who witnessed these elaborate displays saw tangible evidence of their ruler's special relationship with divine forces. This fusion of religious belief and political authority created something unprecedented in human history. Egyptian pharaohs didn't rule through force alone, but through cosmic mandate that made resistance seem not just treasonous, but cosmically dangerous. The system produced 3,000 years of remarkably consistent civilization, outlasting countless other ancient kingdoms. The pharaoh's role as cosmic guardian established principles that would define Egyptian identity for millennia. Divine kingship, bureaucratic stability, and cultural continuity all grew from this fundamental idea that earthly rulers could maintain universal balance through proper governance. Part 4. Endurance of Dynastic Principles. The principles born with Egypt's first dynasty proved remarkably resilient, surviving invasions, foreign rulers, and the rise and fall of empires. Even when Alexander the Great conquered Egypt in 332 BCE, he immediately recognized the power of pharaonic tradition. Rather than dismantling the system, he traveled to the Oracle of Amen at Siwa Oasis, seeking confirmation as the rightful pharaoh. The Greek and later Roman rulers who followed adopted the same strategy, presenting themselves as divine kings while maintaining Egypt's ancient bureaucratic structures. This adaptability became Egypt's greatest strength. The Ptolemaic dynasty, founded by Alexander's general, ruled for 3 centuries by carefully blending Greek culture with Egyptian traditions. Cleopatra VII, the dynasty's final ruler, spoke Egyptian fluently and participated in religious ceremonies as a traditional pharaoh, even as she negotiated with Roman leaders using Greek diplomatic customs. The system's flexibility allowed it to absorb foreign influences while preserving its core identity. Egypt's administrative model spread throughout the ancient world. The Romans, renowned for their own bureaucracy, studied Egyptian record-keeping methods and taxation systems. Persian rulers adopted similar divine kingship concepts, while neighboring African kingdoms modeled their court ceremonies on pharaonic rituals. The idea that rulers could claim cosmic authority through proper religious observance became a template for legitimacy across cultures. The durability of Egyptian culture impressed even its conquerors. Roman emperors continued building temples in traditional Egyptian style for centuries after conquest. Christian monks preserved Egyptian mathematical and medical knowledge in monastery libraries. When Arab armies arrived in 641 CE, they found a civilization that had maintained its essential character for over 3 millennia. Modern archaeology continues revealing how deeply these dynastic principles shaped human civilization. Egyptian medical papyri influenced Greek physicians who founded Western medicine. Egyptian mathematical concepts, including early decimal systems and geometric principles used in pyramid construction, contributed to advances in engineering and astronomy. The bureaucratic innovations that allowed pharaohs to govern the Nile's length became models for modern administrative states. Perhaps most significantly, Egypt demonstrated that stable civilization required more than military might. The combination of religious legitimacy, efficient administration, and cultural continuity created a society that could weather external shocks while maintaining internal coherence. This lesson resonated through history, influencing everything from Byzantine imperial ceremony to modern concepts of national identity. The Egyptian example showed that true power came from creating systems people believed in, rather than simply feared. When citizens saw their rulers as cosmic guardians maintaining universal balance, governance became a collaborative effort rather than imposed control. This insight would influence political philosophy for millennia, offering an alternative to purely authoritarian or purely democratic models. As Egypt entered the Christian era, these ancient principles began their transformation into new forms, setting the stage for how traditional civilization would adapt to revolutionary religious change.